Well, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Andrei Bezrikov, and this is the open session of the Strategic Intelligence Program. Strategic intelligence is about looking beyond the horizon. This is about proactively reducing strategic uncertainty for decision makers. And we are now living quite extraordinary times. We are at the time when all the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting, when the old rules are no longer valid, and when new rules are appearing. We're also at the very extraordinary place. We're in Moscow today. This is a focal point of contact, and I would even say of confrontation of our two largest shifting tectonic plates. And we do not have a very clear idea whether those shifts will slowly dissipate or we will have a very violent earthquake. From the point of view of strategic intelligence, it is very important to understand the underlying forces, the deep drivers of what's going on. And there are very few people in the world who are able to explain it with such a force and clarity as George Fridmana. When I was a young intelligence officer, I was using George's reading to vaccinate myself from, I'm sorry for the word, the flow of a bullshit that you would get from the media. And thank you to George, I developed a better ability to separate the events which are really significant from the noise. This is the first time George is coming to Moscow. Well, privately I can tell you that American Airlines desperately trying to abort this trip, but we succeeded. So, George is a founder and chairman of STRATFOR, probably the most known private intelligence agency dealing with strategic forecasting and strategic intelligence. He is probably the most important authority right now on geopolitics. So please welcome George Fridmana. George will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So please don't be shy.
Only in Moscow would it be assumed that American Airlines was conspiring against me. We Americans never believe in conspiracies. Thank you for coming tonight. I didn't think I would ever lecture on geopolitics in Moscow. Because being my age, Moscow was a place of danger and darkness. And now I see it's not. So, let's talk about STRATFOR for a second and its name. The origin of its name really is strategic forecasting. In 1995, when we start business, and it is a business, are freer by selling what we know than by asking for money from the government or things like that. When we started it, I decided that it was too hard to type www.strategicforecasting.com. So it's shortened to STRATFOR, because after all, who is going to use the internet? So it's not important. Out of that, we got the name STRATFOR. I wouldn't have picked it myself. It grew. I had no choice. And this is the first lesson to begin with. We live with some choices, but mostly they are the illusion of choices. We think we can shape our lives any way we want, but in fact our lives are severely constrained. If that were not true, then we could predict nothing. The entire idea of forecasting is based on the idea of some sort of necessity, and out of that necessity comes prediction. I wrote a book a few years ago in which I predicted that there would be a conflict between Russia and the West, particularly the United States, over Ukraine. It was not an isolated guess. It derived from a method. That method allows us to think through something. It's not perfectly, but it's not magic. It's not guesswork, and it's not luck. And it is the heart of intelligence. In the end, all intelligence is about forecasting. Whether you are going to get a bit of information that will allow your president to know what the American president will say at the next meeting, or whether you're going to predict the future of your country. This is the task of intelligence. Now, many in intelligence believe that the purpose of intelligence is to pass around bits of paper to each other and have arguments with each other. Who will get what budget? But that is a very important side product, a byproduct of intelligence. The core of intelligence is knowing what will happen somehow and in some way. So how do we do this? Well, we begin by appreciating two things. All of us are born someplace. And where you are born makes a tremendous difference in what choices you have. If you are born in Iceland, or if you are born in the Congo, or if you are born in New York, or if you are born in Smolensk, the moment of birth, many things drop away as possibilities. And the heart of forecasting is understanding that which is impossible. Not what is possible, what is impossible. So if you are born to a poor family in the Congo, enormous amounts of things are impossible. And I can predict, to some degree, what your life will be like. If you are born to a very wealthy family in New York, other things are impossible. I can't become a beggar. It's very unlikely. There are many things I can't be. So when we consider a human being and the moment of birth, we already see how much falls away. And that which remains becomes the sheath of possibilities. And then we discover that you're not very smart. And we discover that you are very smart. And we discover that you can't get along with other people. And we discover that you are wonderful with people, and on and on. And as these things from your birth emerge, the choices in your life become narrower and narrower and narrower. And as you grow older, and you fall in love, and you get married, this closes off other opportunities. And as you decide to become a student at this university, this opens up opportunities and closes opportunities. So think of the individual life and how much choice there is. When you reach my age and you look back on it, life actually starts to make sense. What appeared to be a series of random, incoherent choices, that I would create a company in Texas that does strategic forecasting, which I never imagined would be the case. It happened, sort of. But when I look back, I say, where else could it all wind up? I was interested in intelligence. I was interested in forecasting. I couldn't stand the place I was. What else could I have done? But I was an American, hence this was possible. Had I been Chinese, this may not have been so possible. And so when you have a close, almost molecular understanding of a life, you can look back on it and see that it tells a story. And that story is not a surprise. Who is it the greatest surprise to? To the person who lived it. To that person, it's a surprise. So that when you talk to decision makers, they very rarely know why they're making the decision. They're dealing with this moment. They don't see where it's leading. It's when you step back at a distance that you can begin to see the tapestry. And this is what Machiavelli said in The Prince, in the introduction. When he said, "Forgive me, my prince, for writing these things about you, but sometimes it is easier to see the truth at a distance from the mountain than sitting on the mountaintop." And this was a critical lesson. The intention of people and what comes out of it are very different. It is the unintended consequences, unintended in the sense of it was not subjectively what you wished or thought you wished. It is the unintended consequences that you can see if you're not that person. It is much easier for me to see what will happen to one of you if I really knew you than for you to see. Because your views are filled with wishes, illusions, desires, misconceptions. I have no such burden. And so, those who think that intelligence is finding out what the president thinks of either of our countries will be badly disillusioned. Presidents are more like each other than they are like us. Why? If you're the president of the United States, 330 million people. If you're the president of Russia, I don't know how much the count is now, 180 million, I think? I'm not sure. 120, I'm sorry. But 140. But one of you is worth more than just one, so it's all right. The point is, to become the leader of a country requires a certain extraordinary discipline. You don't just bop along, as we say in the States, and one day, hey, why did I become president? You focus your life on power. And the ability to focus yourself so ruthlessly, so disciplined way, that you, among all the hundreds of millions of others who could become president, that you are the one who becomes that, shapes you in an extraordinary way. It doesn't necessarily make you nicer. It doesn't necessarily make you smarter. But there's one thing that the President of the United States and the President of Russia have in common. They know how to be president. And they knew how to become president. And so if we begin with that understanding, and we take a look at what they worry about every day, do they worry about 30 years from now? Do they worry about what will happen in the area of computing? They worry about how to remain president. And in that worry, that shapes their mind. And out of their actions come the unintended consequences. When I was younger and we were studying your country, the Americans, like your people, tried to get every bit of information they could get out of your Politburo. And the assumption was the higher you went, the more they knew. And if you only get their telephone conversations, their emails or mails at that time, if you just got those, you would know what would happen. One of the interesting things was that those who followed all of the details of what Gorbachev and every other member of the Politburo was saying were the last to know what would happen. Because Gorbachev was the last to know what was going to happen. The assumption that source-based intelligence operates from is that the knowledge of long-term events is contained in the leader's head. The leader isn't even thinking about long-term events, sometimes not even about short-term events. He's trying to figure out how to stay present. The danger of source-based intelligence, which both our countries love, is that you assume the source has any idea of what he's talking about. You say, well, he's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, or he's Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Surely he knows. I've known Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and I can assure you they have no idea. Their question is, how can they become Deputy Secretary of State? Their question is, how can they move their careers? It is not exclusively that. They also want to deal with their jobs, their countries, and everything else. But they're focused on the moment. And so if you ask them what will happen, they will tell you what they wish would happen. They will tell you what they think you want to hear. Sources are the most dangerous thing in intelligence. They're the most dangerous thing in intelligence not because they lie, of course they lie. Not because you'll misinterpret them, of course you'll misinterpret them. They're dangerous because they have no content. They have no knowledge. And this we find over and over and over again. Hitler did not think he would have to commit suicide in the bunker. Stalin did not think he would be invaded. Only Churchill had some idea, but not much. The point is not that they're stupid, it is that they're not focused on the things you may be focused on. They may not be clear on that, that may not drive them. So the most important thing that we have to do whenever we talk to a friend is understand what they're thinking. But that's impossible because you can't read their minds. Much better to understand the forces that are shaping them. A friend who wants to be a Hollywood actor, who's incredibly ugly, probably you know this is not going to happen unless they need very ugly people. And every once in a while. So, if you think about life of the individual, you will begin to understand how often your friends are delusional and you have a better idea of what's going to happen to them. And you can do strategic forecasting of their lives. And you do. And this is called gossip. And all of you do, and you listen, and you analyze, and you think, and you understand what's going to happen. Now, along with birth comes something that I call love of one's own. You are born to a mother. And your mother may be an idiot, vicious, but you love her. Why? Because it is the most natural thing in the world. The easiest love. The first love. And if your father's there, most of your fathers, I think, would be there, and you would love him too. This requires no thought. And this is a driving element. Because if you love them, you derive your language from them, maybe your religion from them, maybe your hatred of religion from them, maybe they hate religion, therefore you love religion from them, but your life is shaped by them. And their lives, in turn, were shaped by previous generations. And here you have history. And they don't live alone. They live in a community. It could be a tribe, a Greek polis, a modern nation state. But when you are born in a nation state, you have a language. You have a set of beliefs. We're not all philosophers. We don't all invent our beliefs. And we also have a commitment. And this is the beginning of geopolitics. Because the most important question of geopolitics is simply this. Why would anyone rush a machine gun position? Empirically, we know they will. Empirically, we know this is a fact. But it is the first mystery of geopolitics. Because utilitarian philosophers say that all men act out of pleasure. And I've known a utilitarian philosopher who said he gained greater pleasure being killed by a machine gun position than living. This is a point of absurdity that you reach when you push hedonism and utilitarianism so far. It is because there is an element of courage, and a courage that flows from community. And out of this community flows not only love of one's own, but distrust of others. Because there are two ways to make money. One is to work, the other is to steal. Stealing is easier. So everyone around you may have a motive, but certainly among nations, the fear of each other is as natural as the love of one's own. So when we talk about nation and place that you're born, and the time you're born, you must also think about the nation into which you were born. Because your fate and that nation's fate are bound up. There are Americans who say, well, I don't believe in being an American. I believe that I'm a citizen of the world. This is very good in a very powerful country where nobody can attack you. In a small and weak country, there is no illusion that you have a free fate. Your fate as Russians is your fate. It is bound up with the fate of your country. It may be you can do nothing about it, but that fate is important. It determines something. So, in modern times, there's a belief that we are all individuals shaping our way in the world. What I've been arguing is this is the grand illusion. You are Russians. I know you're Russians. I'm an American. We have some issues, you and I. And you may say, it's not your issue. Well, okay. Then when the bombs start to fall, I will say, don't bomb Charlie over here, where you are, because he doesn't think it's his issue. The idea of shared fate is an inevitability. You cannot oppose it. When we look at nations, we also notice that they have certain imperatives. Russia has an imperative. Its enemy is normally to the west. Napoleon, the Austro-Hungarians, the Kaiser, Hitler, all came from the west. The devastation to Russia was catastrophic. What saved you was buffer zones. They had to go a long way to get to Moscow. And each of them failed to reach there. So, why did they fail to reach there? It was a long way. And that bought you time. And so Zhukov's armies could come from Siberia and stand in front of Moscow. And if there wasn't so much time, there wasn't so far, all of your history would be different. So what is your imperative? You must have strategic depth. Everybody must have strategic depth. The United States is an island, except for that little bit of Panama. North America is an island. What is the American imperative? That the oceans should be American. Because if the oceans are American, no one can come. We can invade Iraq, and the Iraqis can't invade us. This is good if you're an American. Not if you're an Iraqi. But in this world, the illusion of humanity is a dangerous one. Because I am not an Iraqi, and they are not Americans, and we have different fates. So if I establish the principle of unintended consequence, which I want to start with, and lead you to the idea that you are born inevitably to a place, and your fate is bound up with that place, then I must think about what is the nature of the problem facing that place and how will it solve it. And if you think about that, which is that Russia must have buffers and the United States must have the sea, and it really doesn't matter if it's Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton, and suddenly they who are so focused on being a president can't really think about the broader question of what is the imperative that drives them. And there are also constraints. Russia has very poor rivers. They don't go together. They don't go to where they need to go. The transportation system is weak, always difficult. This shapes Russia. The United States has only 36 people per square kilometer without Alaska. We don't have enough people, which, believe it or not, can be a serious problem. We have our constraints, you have yours. I'd rather have Americans than Russians. But we all have constraints. For some, it means constant national catastrophe. Poland. For others, it means difficulties. For others, it means successes. If you understand the underlying constraints within the nation state, you can begin to understand what will happen and how they will behave. So let's begin a little understanding. Without talking about leaders or presidents or what President Putin's mood is this week, or does he like Obama, does Obama like him? I can assure you neither care the least about each other. They're presidents, they like who they need to. Let's begin with the year 1992, the year that everything changed. There's a long cycle that began in 1492, when Europe began the process of conquering the world. Up until that point, the Zulus didn't know the Eskimos, the Japanese had never heard of the Aztecs. The world was fragmented. What the Europeans did in 200-300 ruthless, bloody years was tear apart all of these sequestered worlds and jam them together into one. From 1492 to 1992, there was always a European power which was the leading global power. Spain, France, Britain. There was always one. In 1992, for the first time, there was not a single European global power, because the Soviet Union, the last European global power, fell. It fell apart. And all the others were at best regional powers, if that. There was now only one global power in the world, the United States. And for the first time in 500 years, the center of gravity of the global system moved from Europe to North America. And North America, of course, was also the only country, continent, native to both the Atlantic and the Pacific, in the Pacific Age, was able to trade in both efficiently and also was able to control the seas. Very important. But 1992 was more than just the end of the long cycle, the beginning of a new one. It was also the fall of the Soviet Union, of course. But in that year, the Japanese economic miracle stopped being miraculous. Tiananmen Square happened in '91, which defined what China would be like for the next 20 years. Operation Desert Storm defined the Middle East, gave rise to Al-Qaeda. Tremendous operation. Okay. So this was a moment in which everything came together. And of course, no one at the time knew it. They didn't realize it for a moment. It was all separate things. But what the world did was have a major upheaval. What emerged from this was three pillars of the international system. The United States, about 1/4 of the world's GDP, at that time was like 30%. control of all the world's oceans. No power had ever had that in the world, in history. This was one pillar. The second was Europe. The Maastricht Treaty had been signed in 91, and in 92 it was assumed that Europe would come together not just economically, but politically and militarily, become a counterweight to the United States, and regain its position as a global power, not alone, but together. And the third was China. In every generation, there is a country that has low wages and high growth rates. Before China was Japan, which was going to overtake the entire world. And in 1880 was the United States. Low wages and high growth. So these are the three pillars on which it was founded. In 2008, in 7 weeks, two events undermined this world and began changing it. The first, on August 8th, was Russia's return to history with its war with Georgia. I won't say invasion because you've been insulted. But at that moment, Russia announced that its history wasn't over. Russia announced that it would act. It also acted because the United States was in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan and couldn't do anything about it. But it acted. Russia was back. And all of the truths on which Europe was built, all of the assumptions that America made were wrong.